Hi, my name is Emily Sanford, and I'm a 26-year-old biologist from Texas. And my passion is bats. In fact, I call myself a bat-advocate. I quite literally stumbled into my passion for bats by tripping over a bat hole. And when I looked inside the hole, something flew across. And I was like, oh, that was a big moth or something. And all these bats poured out. And at first I was terrified. I ran away screaming. But it actually inspired me to learn more about bats. So I was quite fortunate to receive a grant to go study bats around the world. This grant was called the Thomas J. Watson Fellowship. I proposed to go study how different cultures perceive bats and how their perceptions impact bat conservation. For this research, I traveled to 9 countries, and in these locations, I went to go interview people on all spectrums, people who hated bats to the bat lovers. Bats are some of the most misunderstood mammals in the world. Because they're nocturnal and we don't see them, it's quite easy for myths to develop about them. Bats are unfortunately associated with vampires, as bad omens, and they have a very negative portrayal in the media as being carriers of death. As if bats' reputation hasn't been battered enough, also exaggerated risks about diseases like rabies and COVID have also further perpetuated people's fears about bats globally. Incredibly important animals. They help us by eating pest insects, by pollinating plants, and by dispersing seeds. So a small bat can eat up to 1,000 mosquito-sized insects in a single hour. And bats actually save the U.S. agricultural industry $23 billion a year by eating crop pests and reducing the need for farmers to use pesticides. Usually if you think of pollinators, you think of birds and the bees. 500 different species of plants depend on bats for pollination. Bats pollinate plants like bananas, mangoes, durian, agave, and guava. And agave is actually the plant that we use to make tequila. So next time you have tequila, do a cheers for bats. So I met with some farmers in Australia who were having conflicts with bats who were eating the fruit from their orchards. And obviously the farmers had a right to be upset because this was their livelihood. However, their solution was to try to kill them. And by killing the bats, it had very negative impacts on the ecosystem at large. We were able to find a mutually beneficial solution. So instead of killing the bats, the farmers were able to put fine netting over their crops, which prevented the bats from eating their fruit, but also allowed the bats to still exist in the wild. In conservation, it's very important to take people's livelihoods into consideration. You can't just tell them that they can't protect their fields, but if you can do so in a way that doesn't harm the wildlife, that's the best case solution. I also traveled to places like Papua New Guinea and Nepal and Cambodia, where people would actually catch bats to eat them. And this makes sense because in a lot of these places, they didn't have larger land animals, so bats were quite a staple in their diet. And when bats are hunted on a small scale, local level, it doesn't dramatically hurt the bats' populations. Unfortunately, bat populations are declining in almost every place that has been investigated. Bats are suffering, like a lot of our wildlife, from deforestation and habitat loss. There have been many recorded cases of heat waves coming through and decimating bat colonies, causing them to overheat and literally fall out of the trees. There are other consequences of human behavior that is affecting bats and causing them to decline. For example, bats are being electrocuted on power lines, caught on barbed wire, and sliced in wind turbines, all of which are leading to bats' populations declining rapidly. And as if bats weren't under enough pressure already, there's a disease called white nose syndrome the researchers are calling the most devastating wildlife disease of modern times. It's caused some colonies to decline by over 95%. Bats have very long lifespans. One of the fruit bats can live for about 40 years in the wild, and they're very slow to reproduce. So when a colony is killed, it has a very devastating impact.
Stretch that wing. Getting under your arm.
Educating people about the value of bats is the most important way to change people's perceptions about them and help save the bats.
Bats also hibernate in caves. So basically when
I've personally given several talks about bats, dressed in a bat costume, which helps get people's attention and helps get people excited about bats. But there's also things that you can do on a day-to-day basis. If you hear someone talking about a myth about bats, you can say, actually, you know, bats are really important for us. If you want a simple and affordable way to help save the bats, putting up a bat house is a great option. The bats will find it, move in, and raise their pups here, and it's a great way to directly contribute to bat conservation. I love bats because they're really fascinating, unique animals. They're the only mammals that can fly. They come in a range of different colors and shapes and sizes and traits. Bats have even been found to adopt orphan bats and to share food with other bats that have shared food with them before. Bats are very intelligent, fascinating animals, and I think everyone should love them.